Thank you so much for being with me. You're watching CNN's special breaking news coverage into what brought down EGYPTAIR Flight 804. There's a lot to get into today. We can tell you that the families have just been told that the plane has crashed. The question at the moment, was it terror? The jet vanishing with 66 people on board more than 16 hours ago now. It traveled from Paris en route to Cairo. We know radar contact was lost just 2 minutes after crossing into Egyptian airspace, and this frantic search launched over the Mediterranean Sea. Just a short time ago, we got a huge announcement from the Vice President of EGYPTAIR right here on CNN.
First of all, our heart goes out for all the family members and friends of all involved in this terrible incident. As I can tell you now that we have found the wreckage. We confirmed that the wreckage has been found, and the search and rescue teams are now it's turning into a search and recovery.
Egypt says chances are this plane was brought down by terrorists, not a mechanical issue. We also now know the weather was clear at the time. Greece saying the plane swerved before it plunged from 37,000 feet, the safest of cruising altitudes. And we are now also getting word from U.S. officials who say their early theory is that the bomb indeed took this plane down. For more on this revelation, let's go to our Justice correspondent, Evan Perez. Tell me why, Evan, U.S. intel believes this was likely an act of terror.
Well, Brooke, it's partly because of things that they are not seeing. You know, this is one of a theory that's based really right now on a lack of information. They don't have a lot of information to go on. But I can tell you this. They've looked at the idea of perhaps some kind of mechanical failure, and given the fact that this is a fairly new aircraft, it appears to be very well maintained. The fact that there was no SOS, no call for help from the aircraft. This is a very sophisticated aircraft. It's even very difficult. I'm told by authorities that it's even difficult for someone to intentionally try to ditch it. The plane is designed to keep flying. Certainly at 37,000 feet, that's the expectation. There's a lot of suspicion here now simply because of the circumstances we're talking about. Not only the security situation in Egypt with the rise of an ISIS affiliate there, but also the increased security concern in Western Europe. We've had multiple terrorist attacks there. We've had concerns about the Paris airport. It is generally viewed as a very secure place, but that is most likely where investigators are going to start. They're going to start looking at the people who had access to this aircraft, people who are working on the ground there, and frankly, the Egyptians are going to have to take a closer look at the crew, the 10 crew members who were on the plane, including the 3 security officers and the 2 pilots who were on board, as well as reviewing the flight manifest. We're told, Jim Sciutto actually was told by one of his security sources that the U.S. has begun looking at the flight manifest, and so far they've seen no red flags come up running those names against U.S. terror watch list. And so one of the things now that has to happen is we have to recover the wreckage and begin searching for signs of perhaps a bomb, or if they can find the black boxes, then they can perhaps hear conversations and see what might have been going on in that cockpit before this plane went down, Brooke.
Yeah, according to the VP of EGYPTAIR, you know, he believes they will pretty quickly find the flight data recorders, which is what gets to the crux of the issue, which is what brought this plane down. Evan Perez, thank you so much. Let's bring in our entire panel of experts here. Lessa Bin, CNN aviation analyst, Michael Weiss, CNN contributor, and Tim Taylor, Sea Operations and Submersible Specialist at Tiburon Subsea, President and CEO of Tiburon Subsea, Mary Schiavo, CNN aviation analyst and former Inspector General for the Department of Transportation, Sean Prunicki, Flight 5191 accident investigator, air safety expert, Ohio University, Juliet Kayyem, CNN national security analyst and co-author of ISIS Inside the Army of Terror, and senior editor for the Daily Beast. So mega panel, but we need you all on a day like today. We're going to talk with you, take a commercial break, and we'll continue the conversation if you don't all get in here at once. But Sean Prunicki, to you first. I want to pose the same question I essentially posed to Evan, which is, you know, if there's not a smoking gun, a proverbial smoking gun here with U.S. intel, why would the U.S. come out and say they believe it is likely a terror attack, they believe it is likely there was a bomb on the plane?
Well, you know, I think the reason somebody, you know, any government or any group would say that is because they have information that they're not sharing with us yet. That's a pretty bold step to make that declaration,
right.
And we're all very interested, obviously, to see what they're going to say to back that up.
Mary Schiavo, to you, let's take this all back 5 steps, right? So we know this plane, it took off from Paris en route to Cairo. Before then, we know it had been in Africa. We know about 24 hours prior, it had been in Eritrea, it had been in Tunisia, and then according to this vice president of EGYPTAIR, there was a full sweep at Charles de Gaulle involving, you know, personnel on board, involving maintenance crews. What would the sweeps have entailed to make sure the plane was clean and good to go?
Well, you know, and I just had one of my staff who's fluent in French translate some of the French reports on what the sweep involved. And so here's what happened. So after the attacks and about the time of the attacks in Paris and Brussels last year, they went into the airport and they searched the lockers. And they searched the lockers looking for terrorist-related materials. And of course, the workers in the secure areas had a background check. The background check consisted of them checking with local or provincial local authorities. It doesn't say they ever did a background check, for example, using Interpol or any checking against any international lists of suspected terrorists, etc. And so when they searched, what they did is they looked in the airport lockers to see if anyone had brought terrorist materials to the airport. And those people were stripped of their security badges, but if they worked for a subcontractor, and the airport's run by a company, I think it's ADP, it's not our ADP, it's a different one, but it's a French company, and if the companies, the subcontractors, had jobs outside the secure areas, these workers had to be given jobs in the non-secure areas, so they weren't all fired, which is a shocking development.
Wow. Let me come back to that because I remember being in Paris in the wake of the terror attacks last fall, and this is an issue, fears of radicalization within some of these, you know, airport and public transportation personnel, and that's been an issue for a couple of years. But Juliet, let me pick up off of something that Sean mentioned off the top. If we're talking terrorism and talking about a possible bomb, at least according to the U.S., you know, and he made the point that the U.S. Authorities must have some kind of information that the rest of us don't have to make such a bold declaration. What kind of information could that be?
Well, I'm not convinced that they have new information, but there's a world of the obvious explanation, and there's only a limited number of explanations for why a plane falls out of the sky: mechanical failure, pilot error, or some purposeful disruption. You don't even have to call it terrorism at this stage. And so given that a lot of the data suggests something very catastrophic happened, there's no SOS, there's no bad weather, the plane is erratic at the last moments, all of those data points suggest something purposeful happened. And given the threat environment that we're in, it is not a huge jump to say it might be terrorism. But what we have to be clear is that whatever we're hearing, all pieces of that investigation are going forward equally. In other words, we don't want to close off anything because we may miss something. The most important thing is, picking up on what Mary said, is the planes have to keep flying, right? And they have to be safe. You can't close all these airplanes while you figure this out. So that's what's going on right now in terms of the 3 pieces of that investigation.
All right, well, let's bring in our 777 pilot. I'm turning to you, Lefty Bend, here. You know, as we talk about the twists and turns, right? So the flight apparently seemed normal as it was leaving Greek airspace, and Athens was trying to communicate with the pilots before they switched over to Cairo. It went from 37,000 at some point, then to 15 to 10. Planes don't just drop out of the air. Made some twists and turns, 90-degree turn one way, 360 another. How do you read all of that?
My gut reaction, Brooke, is not something catastrophic happened. What caused it? I'm not ready. I'm not ready to say terrorism. But I mean, there's a lot that leads to that by virtue of the fact, yes, there's not a lot of other information out there because it seemed like a normal flight, normal communication, so on and so forth. An Airbus, remember now, I'm not really sure where that data is coming from, okay? Is it radar data that's coming from the aircraft at the last minute where it lost all its power and it was breaking up? Or is it pieces of that airplane coming down? But if it was in a whole intact airplane making those kind of turns, it's very erratic, and that's very difficult for an Airbus to do because there are systems designed in that airplane to prevent the pilot from, for instance, overbanking the aircraft.
if you look at the TikTok, 1:48 in the morning, the pilot checked in with Greece, described as cheerful. Fast forward to 2:27 in the morning, air traffic control in Athens contacted the pilots to transfer to Cairo. Pilots didn't respond. What would protocol be in that time? And that time is significant.
Well, it's significant. I mean, it may or may not be from the standpoint of there was nothing else going on. They established communications with the Greek controllers, and then they knew they were going to go to the next boundary
so they were
of air traffic.
Along, presumably fine.
They were until whatever happened. Remember, we had an Air Asia flight. Now, granted, weather had a lot to do with it, but the crew reacted, unfortunately, not appropriately to what the airplane was doing, and the airplane fell out of the sky because of an aerodynamic stall as a result of a mechanical issue. We don't know yet. We're trying to draw parallels with other accidents, but let's take it a step at a time. Even if this is a potential explosive device, there's got to be something different about how did it get there, where did it get on the airplane if that indeed occurred. But you know, that drop in altitude, plus the turn, the 360 and so on. It's well, I mean, that's pretty radical for an airliner.
Charles de Gaulle. We've all flown in and out of Paris, right? Many of us have. In the wake of what happened, especially in Paris last fall and then Brussels this year, and also to Mary Schiavo's point about I think it was like 4,000 lockers that were looked into or raided within personnel. Tell me more about this airport.
Well, I mean, security has amplified enormously, particularly after the Paris attacks. My colleague Chris Dickey lives in Paris, and he flew out of there very recently to come to New York and said, you know, the security protocols are like he's never seen before.
Really?
So, look, again, this is all speculation, and let's not jump to any conclusions, but if it was an act of terrorism, if it was a bomb, chances are very strong that it was placed, you know, from Charles de Gaulle Airport. And in that instance, look, what are we talking about here? A passenger who got through the security checkpoints, possibly with some kind of chemically doused clothing. Remember the Khorasan group in Syria? The U.S. was going after them because they said these guys were trying to do that, smuggle clothing, shirts that had been doused in some kind of explosive chemical aboard commercial airliners and detonate them while on board. Could it have been a device like the soda can IED that ISIS put into Metrojet in Sharm el-Sheikh? If that's the case, then Charles de Gaulle has been infiltrated by terrorists. There are people who are working in the airport, either as flight crew. I mean, the pilot, I think at this point it seems a little unlikely given his cheerful mood, as they say. But this is a dreadful state of affairs. And I have to say, I reported a few weeks ago, the new head of ISIS's foreign intelligence, the Amn al-Karji. There are four intel branches that ISIS uses, like security service, very much modeled on Arab totalitarian regimes. The new head of the Amn al-Karji is a French national. He was born in Paris. He's of North African descent. His kunya, or his nom de guerre, is Abu Suleiman al-Faransi. And this comes from a guy who defected from ISIS via informants that are currently in the organization. What does this tell us? ISIS is leaning very, very heavily on the Europeanization of their foreign operations. They are not just looking to attack the West, they are looking to make native sons of the West, people who grew up in Belgium and France, Great Britain, Germany, senior ranking officials in their security apparatus to perpetrate and plan these kinds of attacks. So it is not implausible to me, Brooke, that this could well have been somebody born in France who worked for the airline or worked for the airport and in some way managed to do this, assuming this was an act of terror.
Let me come back to that point. We have a correspondent at Charles de Gaulle. Atika Schubert is standing by. And Atika, can you talk to me a little bit more, just about the current state of security there in the wake of what's happened with this, this plane disappearance, this plane crash, and also to the point of radicalization of airport personnel over the years there?
Absolutely. This is a problem that the Paris investigators have been looking at now for years, but more recently in December, they actually released dozens of people from their jobs, both here at the Charles de Gaulle Airport and at the Orly Airport, for fears that they may be linked to radical Islamists. They took away their security access. So this has been a concern for some time here, but since the terror attacks in November here and of course the Brussels attacks, they stepped up security quite a bit. Even today now, we've seen armed security patrolling the airport, making spot checks of passengers. So the airport is at its highest state of alert. It's operating as normal, but it's absolutely a security concern here. And Charles de Gaulle has some of the tightest security in Western Europe. But short of sealing off the airport and doing security checks a mile away, there really is no way to 100% secure an airport, Brooke.
Atika Schubert, thank you so much. We'll check back in with you. We're going to continue our breaking coverage here of the disappearance, the crash of EgyptAir Flight 804 in the Mediterranean Sea in just a moment.